Picture this. It's 1902. An American soldier forces a Filipino prisoner to the ground, jams a rifle barrel into his mouth, holds his jaw open, pours water down his throat from a 100-gallon tank. The man's stomach swells like a balloon. He's drowning, on dry land, in full view of his village. When he passes out, they jump on his stomach, force the water back out, mixed with blood and vomit. Then they do it again, and again, for hours. This happened to 160 people. Only 26 survived. This torture, called the water cure, was standard operating procedure for U.S. forces in the Philippines from 1899 to 1902. But here's what makes this even darker. When the scandal broke in America, when soldiers testified to Congress about waterboarding and burning villages and killing everyone over the age of 10, President Theodore Roosevelt called it mild torture. Mild. The officer who ordered his troops to turn an entire island into a howling wilderness got court-martialed, fined $50, and retired with full honors. And for the next century, American textbooks barely mentioned this war. The war where we killed somewhere between 200,000 and 1 million Filipinos. The war where we used concentration camps. The war that was America's first counterinsurgency. The war we systematically forgot. This is the Philippine-American War. And everything you're about to hear actually happened. Subscribe right now if you want real history. The kind they don't teach because it's too uncomfortable. Hit that bell. Drop a comment telling me if you learned about this war in school. I'm betting most of you didn't, because the Philippine-American War has been systematically erased from American memory. When it's mentioned at all, it's called a minor conflict or an insurrection. Words designed to minimize what actually happened. But this was a 3-year war. 126,000 U.S. troops deployed. 4,200 American soldiers killed. Between 200,000 and 1 million Filipino civilians dead. Most from disease and starvation caused by U.S. military tactics. It was America's first overseas colonial war. Our first counterinsurgency. Our first use of waterboarding. Our first concentration camps. And it was all based on a lie that we were liberating the Philippines from Spanish rule and bringing them democracy. Instead, we crushed their independence movement, imposed colonial rule, and committed atrocities that would be called war crimes today. Let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about how America accidentally became an empire, and how we justified what we did in the name of civilization. February 15, 1898. The USS Maine explodes in Havana Harbor, Cuba. 266 American sailors die. Nobody knows what caused the explosion. Probably an internal accident. But yellow journalism newspapers, especially William Randolph Hearst's New York Journal, blame Spain. Remember the Maine. To hell with Spain. 2 months later, America declares war on Spain. The Spanish-American War lasts 4 months. It's barely a war. More like a one-sided beatdown. Spain's empire is crumbling. Their military is outdated. America crushes them in Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. Wait, the Philippines? Yeah. That's the part most Americans didn't see coming. May 1st, 1898. Commodore George Dewey sails into Manila Bay with the U.S. Asiatic Squadron. He destroys the entire Spanish Pacific Fleet in 7 hours. Not a single American death. Suddenly, America controls Manila Bay and has 11,000 troops occupying a Spanish colony halfway around the world. But here's the thing. Filipinos had been fighting for independence from Spain for decades. They had a revolutionary army. They had a leader, Emilio Aguinaldo. They declared independence on June 12, 1898. They thought America was there to help them win freedom from Spain. That's what Dewey had promised Aguinaldo. They were wrong. December 10, 1898. The Treaty of Paris officially ends the Spanish-American War. Spain cedes Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines to the United States. America pays Spain $20 million for the Philippines. Let me repeat that. America bought the Philippines from Spain. Bought them, like property, without asking Filipinos what they wanted. The Filipino Revolutionary Government, which had already declared independence, written a constitution, and established the first Philippine Republic, was not consulted, not recognized, treated as irrelevant. Emilio Aguinaldo and Filipino leaders were outraged. They'd fought Spain for years. They'd helped Americans capture Manila. And now America was claiming ownership? Back in the U.S., the debate was fierce. Anti-imperialists like Mark Twain and William Jennings Bryan argued passionately against annexation. Mark Twain wrote, "We have gone there to conquer, not to redeem. We have debauched America's honor and blackened her face before the world." But imperialists won. They argued that the Philippines was strategically valuable for trade with Asia. Filipinos were uncivilized and needed American guidance. If we didn't take them, another power would. It was America's duty to civilize and Christianize, ignoring that Philippines was already 85% Christian from Spanish colonization. President William McKinley claimed God had told him in prayer to uplift and civilize and Christianize Filipinos. On February 4, 1899, just 2 days before the Senate ratified the Treaty of Paris, fighting broke out between American soldiers and Filipino forces near Manila. Who fired first is disputed. Both sides blame the other. But the result was clear. America was going to war against the very people we claimed to be liberating. February 5, 1899. The Senate ratifies the Treaty of Paris by just 2 votes, the minimum required. America officially takes possession of the Philippines. Filipino leaders send peace envoys. Aguinaldo requests an armistice to negotiate. American military commander General Elwell Otis refuses. Otis will only accept unconditional surrender. Nothing else. The Filipinos refuse. They've been fighting for independence for years. They're not going to surrender without even trying. So it's war. For the first 6 months, Filipino forces fought conventionally. Organized army, uniforms, traditional military tactics. They had about 80,000 troops, most armed with outdated rifles, some with bolos, large machetes, limited ammunition, no artillery, no naval support. The U.S. had 70,000 troops by mid-1899. Modern weapons, artillery, naval support from warships in Manila Bay, unlimited supplies. It was a mismatch, but Filipinos had advantages. Knowledge of terrain, support from the population, commitment to independence. They were fighting for their homeland. Americans? Most didn't want to be there. They'd signed up to fight Spain in Cuba. Suddenly they're in tropical jungles halfway around the world fighting people they barely understood. The racism was immediate and brutal. American soldiers called Filipinos niggers, gugus, and gugus, slurs that would later become gooks in Vietnam and Korea. Rudyard Kipling wrote The White Man's Burden in 1899, specifically about the Philippines. It framed colonization as a noble sacrifice. Take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best ye breed. Go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need. The poem portrayed Filipinos as half devil and half child, who needed white guidance. This mindset justified everything that came next. Through 1899, American forces pushed Filipino troops back from Manila, captured key cities, used superior firepower to win battle after battle. General Otis kept declaring victory, kept insisting the insurgency was almost defeated, kept requesting just a few more troops to finish the job. Sound familiar? Same script as Vietnam 70 years later. By November 1899, Filipino forces had been pushed into the mountains and countryside. They'd lost most conventional engagements. President McKinley and his supporters claimed the war was basically over, just mopping up. Then Aguinaldo changed strategy. November 13, 1899. Aguinaldo officially orders Filipino forces to abandon conventional warfare and switch to guerrilla tactics. Small units, hit-and-run attacks, ambushes, retreat into jungle and villages where Americans couldn't follow. Make occupation so costly that Americans would eventually leave. The strategy was inspired partly by the Cuban rebels who'd worn down Spain, and partly by necessity. They couldn't win conventional battles. It worked. Suddenly American forces were taking casualties constantly. Patrols ambushed, Supply lines attacked. Troops isolated in small garrisons getting picked off. In the first 4 months of guerrilla war, Americans had nearly 500 casualties. General Otis was replaced by General Arthur MacArthur, father of Douglas MacArthur. MacArthur understood guerrilla warfare from fighting Native Americans in the Indian Wars. He brought those tactics to the Philippines. And that's when things got really dark. MacArthur's strategy was simple. Make it impossible for guerrillas to operate. Cut off their supplies. Separate them from civilians who supported them. Destroy food sources. Concentrate civilians in controlled areas. Sound familiar again? Same strategy Britain used against Boer civilians in South Africa. Same strategy Spain used in Cuba. Same strategy America would use in Vietnam. It's called reconcentration, or concentration camps, though Americans didn't like that term. Here's how it worked. Step 1. Declare protected zones. American forces would designate areas around military garrisons as protected zones. Civilians living there were supposedly safe from guerrillas. Step 2. Force civilian relocation. Everyone outside protected zones had to relocate. Villages were burned. Crops destroyed. Livestock killed. Anyone who stayed was considered a combatant and could be shot. Step 3. Control food. Strict controls on food movement. No rice could be transported without permits. This was meant to starve guerrillas, but it starved everyone. Conditions in the concentration zones were horrific. Overcrowding. No sanitation. Disease spread rapidly. Dysentery, cholera, malaria. Thousands died. Most deaths in the war weren't from bullets. They were from disease and starvation in these camps. General J. Franklin Bell implemented this in Batangas province in late 1901. Within months, 11,000 Filipinos dead from disease and starvation. Entire villages destroyed. Livestock killed. Crops burned. Bell reported to his superiors that the reconcentration was successful. Guerrilla activity in Batangas declined sharply, because there was nothing left. The population was dead or dying. But reconcentration was just one tactic. The interrogation methods were worse. Enter the water cure. The water cure was America's version of waterboarding, but more brutal. Here's how soldiers described it in testimony to Congress. Sergeant Charles Riley, 26th Infantry. The prisoner was tied and placed on his back under a water tank holding probably 100 gallons. The faucet was opened and a stream of water was forced down or allowed to run down his throat. His throat was held so he could not prevent swallowing the water. He was directly under the faucet, with his mouth held wide open. Lieutenant Grover Flint. A man is thrown down on his back and 3 or 4 men sit or stand on his arms and legs and hold him down. Either a gun barrel or a rifle barrel or a stick is thrust into his jaws and his jaws are thrust back. And a wooden log or stone is put under his head or neck so he can be held more firmly. Then they pour gallons of water. The victim's stomach swells massively. They're drowning. On land. Unable to breathe except brief gasps. When they pass out, soldiers jump on the victim's stomach or hit it with rifle butts. The water is forcibly expelled, mixed with blood, stomach contents, sometimes parts of the stomach lining. Then they do it again. One soldier testified he helped administer the water cure to 160 Filipinos. 134 died. Let that sink in. 84% mortality rate. President Theodore Roosevelt, who took office after McKinley's assassination in September 1901, was briefed on the water cure. His response? He privately wrote to a friend that it was an old Filipino method of mild torture. Nobody was seriously damaged. Mild torture. He went further. The Filipinos had inflicted incredible tortures on our people. This became the justification. Filipinos were cruel, so Americans had to be cruel back. An eye for an eye. Never mind that the U.S. was occupying their country. Never mind that Filipino cruelty was resistance to foreign invasion. The water cure wasn't secret. Soldiers wrote letters home describing it. Small-town newspapers published them. Anti-imperialists like the Anti-Imperialist League circulated accounts. In 1902, it became a full scandal. The Senate Committee on the Philippines launched investigations. Soldiers testified. Officers admitted to using the water cure routinely. Major Edwin Forbes Glenn was the most prominent case. Glenn openly admitted to waterboarding Filipinos. His defense? It was necessary for intelligence gathering. It was effective. Everyone was doing it. He was court-martialed in November 1901. His punishment? Suspended from command for 1 month. Fined $50, equivalent to $1,890 today. That's it. The Army judge advocate said the charges constituted resort to torture with a view to extort a confession and recommended stronger punishment because the United States cannot afford to sanction torture. But higher-ups disagreed. Glenn was minimally punished and his career continued. He wasn't the only one using torture. It was widespread, standard operating procedure. Another technique, the rope cure, strangling prisoners with ropes around their necks until they talked or died. Another, simply beating prisoners with fists, rifle butts, or bamboo poles for hours. Another, forcing salt water down their throats, then punching their swollen stomachs. Soldiers justified it as necessary. Filipinos knew where guerrillas hid, where weapons were stored, where ambushes were planned. Torture got results. But did it? Military historians now say torture is notoriously unreliable. People will say anything to stop pain. The information is often false. A 3rd-century Roman jurist noted, "The strong will resist, and the weak will say anything to end the pain." But in 1902, American commanders believed torture worked. And they kept doing it. September 28, 1901. Balangiga, Samar Island. Company C of the 9th U.S. Infantry Regiment 78 soldiers were garrisoned in the town of Balangiga. Relations with townspeople had been tense. Captain Thomas Connell, the commanding officer, had been harsh. He'd forced all males over 13 to work at gunpoint, clearing brush and repairing streets. He'd destroyed rice stores to prevent them from reaching guerrillas. On September 28, during breakfast, the town attacked. Church bells rang, the signal. Filipino men emerged from hiding with bolos and seized rifles from American sentries. They attacked the mess area where soldiers were eating. It was brutal. Close quarters fighting. Americans barely had time to grab weapons. Many fought with kitchen knives, chairs, whatever they could find. 54 American soldiers were killed. Many were hacked to death with bolos. Bodies mutilated. Only 4 escaped uninjured. It was the worst American military defeat since Custer's last stand at Little Bighorn in 1876. The American public was shocked. Newspapers compared it to Little Bighorn. Outrage swept the nation. President Roosevelt ordered Major General Adna Chafee, military governor of the Philippines, to pacify Samar. Chafee picked Brigadier General Jacob Hurd Smith. Smith was a veteran of the Indian Wars. He'd fought against the Cheyenne, Apache, and Ute. He'd seen scorched earth campaigns. He knew how to break resistance. He gave orders to Marine Major Littleton Waller. "I want no prisoners. I wish you to kill and burn. The more you kill and burn, the better it will please me. I want all persons killed who are capable of bearing arms against the United States." When Waller asked what age limit that meant, Smith allegedly replied, 10 years. Kill everyone over the age of 10. I want Samar turned into a howling wilderness. Smith later claimed he said 10 sarcastically, that he actually meant fighting-age males. But multiple witnesses testified he said 10. What followed was systematic devastation of Samar. Over the next months, at least 2,000 to 2,500 Filipino civilians killed. Some estimates say 5,000. Over 200 homes burned. Entire villages destroyed. Crops and food stores destroyed. Systematic killing of livestock. One officer wrote, "We burned hundreds of houses and killed many niggers. It is no use trying to put a good face on it. We are here to kill." Major Waller led a march across Samar's interior. A brutal expedition through jungle where Marines became lost, starved, and desperate. During the march, Waller ordered the execution of 11 Filipino guides/porters he accused of treachery. They were shot without trial. This was too much even by the standards of the campaign. Waller was court-martialed in March 1902 for murdering the Filipino guides. He was acquitted. His defense: he was following General Smith's orders. Smith had created an environment where killing Filipinos was routine. Smith himself was court-martialed in April 1902, not for the thousands of civilian deaths, but for conduct prejudicial to good order and military discipline. Specifically, for his kill everyone over 10 order. At his trial, Smith defended his actions. He claimed Filipinos were all enemies, that harsh measures were necessary, that the order hastened the end of resistance. He was found guilty. His punishment: admonishment and forced retirement. That's it. No prison. No fine beyond the court-martial costs. Just a letter of admonishment and retirement with pension. The Army judge advocate was furious. He wrote that the sentence was inadequate to the offense and that Smith's conduct was reckless. But higher-ups didn't care. By 1902, the American public was tired of the war. They wanted it over. Smith became a scapegoat, but only barely. He retired to Ohio, lived comfortably until his death in 1918, never expressed regret. And Samar, the howling wilderness Smith wanted? Estimates are that 15 to 20% of Samar's population died during the pacification campaign. Disease and starvation, not just bullets. The island's agricultural economy was destroyed. Took decades to recover. But back in America, the scandal was already fading. By mid-1902, Americans were sick of bad news from the Philippines. The initial Spanish-American War had been quick, glorious, and popular. A splendid little war, Secretary of State John Hay called it. But the Philippine War dragged on, and on, and on. 3 years. Thousands of American casualties. Brutal tactics. Torture scandals. Kill everyone over 10. It didn't match the narrative of American exceptionalism, of bringing democracy and civilization to benighted peoples. So authorities changed the narrative. July 4, 1902, President Roosevelt officially declares the Philippine-American War over. Victory is proclaimed. Insurgency defeated. Mission accomplished. This was a lie. Filipino guerrilla resistance continued in many regions, especially Muslim areas in the South, for years. Sporadic fighting would continue into the 1910s. But Roosevelt needed to declare victory. The 1902 midterm elections were coming. He needed to move on. So the war was declared over. Newspapers ran victory headlines. Troops started coming home. And the memory management began. Strategy 1. Minimize the numbers. Official U.S. military casualties: 4,234 killed, 2,818 wounded. Filipino military casualties, officially claimed as 16,000 to 20,000 killed. But civilian deaths? Estimates vary wildly. Conservative: 200,000. Mid-range: 500,000 to 750,000. High estimates: 1 million plus. Most died from disease and starvation caused by U.S. military tactics, reconcentration, crop destruction, etc. Official reports downplayed civilian deaths. Blamed them on disease, not American strategy. Implied Filipinos died because they were primitive and unhygienic, not because we destroyed their food supply and forced them into disease-ridden camps. Strategy 2. Change the name. Stop calling it the Philippine-American War. Instead, Philippine Insurrection, or Tagalog Insurgency, or Philippine Rebellion. Notice the language? Insurrection and rebellion imply illegitimate resistance to legitimate authority. It frames Filipinos as criminals, not as a nation fighting for independence. American textbooks adopted this language. For decades, if the war was mentioned at all, it was called an insurrection. Strategy 3. Justify the atrocities. When torture scandals couldn't be denied, they were justified. Filipinos tortured Americans first, ignoring that they were resisting invasion. Torture was necessary for intelligence gathering. Only a few bad apples used excessive force. Guerrilla warfare required harsh countermeasures. President Roosevelt himself led this justification campaign. He argued that Filipinos committed treachery and cruelty that justified American responses. He minimized the water cure, defended concentration camps as necessary, portrayed critics as unpatriotic. Strategy 4. Focus on the benefits of colonization. By 1903 to 1904, the narrative shifted to the good America was doing in the Philippines, building schools, improving infrastructure, teaching English, bringing modern medicine, civilizing the population. Thousands of American teachers, especially women, were sent to the Philippines after the war. They taught English, American history, and American values. This was called the Philippines Experiment, proving that America could be a benevolent colonial power. Never mind the 200,000 plus dead. Never mind the torture. Never mind that Filipinos wanted independence, not colonization. The story became, we fought a difficult war against savage insurgents, but ultimately brought civilization and progress to the islands. Strategy 5. Memory hole. The most effective strategy was simply not talking about it. As the years passed, the Philippine-American War faded from public consciousness. World War I dominated the 1910s. The Roaring Twenties and Great Depression dominated the 1920s-30s. World War II eclipsed everything in the 1940s. By the 1950s, most Americans had never heard of the Philippine-American War. When the Philippines finally gained independence in 1946, after being promised it in 1916, delayed by World War II Japanese occupation, most Americans thought we'd always planned to give them freedom. The 3-year war? The 200,000 plus dead? The torture? The concentration camps? Forgotten. Textbooks mention the Spanish-American War in detail. Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders, San Juan Hill. Remember the Maine, but the Philippine War? A footnote at best. Paragraph. Often skipped entirely. Even today, most Americans don't know it happened. Ask people about early 1900s American history and they'll mention Teddy Roosevelt, the Panama Canal, the Progressive Era. The Philippine War? Blank stares. Why we forgot. 1. No clear villain. Unlike the Civil War, slavery, or World War II Nazis, the Philippine War had no easy villain. We were the aggressors. We were crushing an independence movement. That's uncomfortable. 2. No clear heroes. Roosevelt downplayed his role. Other participants weren't celebrated. Soldiers who served there didn't get parades or memorials. 3. Colonialism fell out of favor. By mid-20th century, colonialism was viewed negatively. American exceptionalism relied on us not being a colonial power like Britain or France. So we retroactively downplayed or erased our colonial wars. 4. Vietnam similarities. When Vietnam became controversial in the 1960s-70s, some historians noticed similarities to the Philippines. Guerrilla warfare, torture scandals, village destruction, body counts, promises of imminent victory, gradual withdrawal amid controversy. But bringing up the Philippines War meant questioning American exceptionalism, suggesting that Vietnam wasn't an aberration, but part of a pattern. Easier to not bring it up. For Filipinos, the war devastated the Philippines. Estimates are that 10% of the population died from combat, disease, and starvation. Entire regions were depopulated, infrastructure destroyed, economy shattered. American colonial rule lasted until 1946, with a break during Japanese occupation in World War II. During that time, English became mandatory in schools. American-style government imposed. Philippine economy integrated into American markets. Filipino culture suppressed in favor of Americanization. Many Filipinos today have mixed feelings about this period. American colonization brought education, infrastructure, and democratic institutions. But it also crushed independence, imposed foreign values, and killed hundreds of thousands. The Balangiga bells, taken by American forces in 1901 as war trophies, weren't returned until 2018. For over a century, Filipinos requested their return. America refused. When they were finally returned, it made international news. But most Americans had no idea what the bells represented or why it mattered. For America, the Philippine-American War established precedents that would echo through the 20th century. 1. Overseas military bases. The U.S. established permanent military bases in the Philippines, Clark Air Base and Subic Bay Naval Base, that operated until the 1990s. This was America's first permanent overseas military presence. Now we have 750-plus bases worldwide. 2. Counterinsurgency doctrine. Tactics developed in the Philippines, concentration camps, population control, destroying civilian infrastructure, became standard U.S. counterinsurgency doctrine. Used again in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. 3. Torture techniques. The water cure became waterboarding. The same justifications used in 1902. It's necessary, it's effective, the enemy is worse, were used again in the War on Terror. When the Abu Ghraib torture scandal broke in 2004, historians immediately noted parallels to the Philippine War. 4. Imperial presidency. McKinley and Roosevelt set precedents for presidents starting wars without congressional declarations. The Philippine War was never formally declared by Congress. This precedent expanded throughout the 20th century: Korea, Vietnam, countless interventions. 5. Forever wars. The Philippine War was America's first forever war. Guerrilla conflict with no clear victory condition. Continual promises of imminent success, gradual escalation. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, same pattern. For individual soldiers, most American soldiers who served in the Philippines came home and never talked about what they'd seen or done. Some were traumatized, what we'd now call PTSD. No treatment available. They just had to live with it. Some were proud of their service, believed they'd brought civilization to savages. Some were ashamed, knew they'd participated in atrocities. Many tried to forget, move on with their lives, never tell their families. One soldier wrote in his diary, "I am as much a cold-blooded murderer as anybody. I hate Orientals. I think I could go home and shoot a Chinese laundryman without a qualm. All this is a result of my experience in the Philippines." That quote captures the racism that underpinned the entire war. Filipinos weren't fully human. They were Orientals, savages, niggers, so their deaths didn't matter as much. This racism wasn't challenged. It was official policy. It appeared in government documents, military orders, and newspaper articles. And it made the atrocities possible. For American-Filipino relations, despite the brutal war, U.S.-Philippine relations have generally been positive since World War II. During World War II, Filipinos fought alongside Americans against Japan. General Douglas MacArthur's famous "I shall return" promise was about liberating the Philippines from Japanese occupation. After independence in 1946, the Philippines remained a close U.S. ally during the Cold War. Today, the Philippines is a major non-NATO ally of the U.S. But the colonial history creates complicated dynamics. Filipino identity was shaped partly in opposition to American colonization, but also influenced by decades of American cultural dominance. And many Filipinos remember what Americans have forgotten, that we killed 200,000 plus of their ancestors in a war for independence. Lesson 1. American exceptionalism has limits. We like to think America is different, that we're the good guys, that we fight for freedom and democracy. But the Philippine-American War shows we're capable of the same imperialism, colonization, and atrocities as any other power. We crushed an independence movement. We used torture and concentration camps. We killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. And we justified it with the same language all imperial powers use. We're bringing civilization. We're helping primitive peoples. We know what's best for them. That should make us humble. Should make us question when our government claims moral superiority. Lesson 2. Torture doesn't work, but countries keep using it. The water cure didn't make the war end faster. It made Filipinos hate Americans more. It strengthened resistance. Just like torture in Vietnam didn't work. Abu Ghraib in Iraq didn't work. Guantanamo didn't work. But every generation, military and intelligence officials convince themselves that this time it'll be different. This time torture will get results. It doesn't. It never does. But we keep forgetting that lesson. Lesson 3. Forever wars aren't new. We talk about Iraq and Afghanistan as new types of conflict, insurgencies with no clear victory, promises of imminent success that never materialize. But the Philippine War was the template. 3 years officially, longer unofficially. Guerrilla warfare, hearts and minds campaigns, constantly moving goalposts for success. In 1899, just need to defeat their army. In 1900, just need to capture their leader. In 1901, just need to pacify a few regions. In 1902, mission accomplished, but fighting continues for years. Sound familiar? Lesson 4. We forget uncomfortable history. The Philippine-American War was systematically erased because it contradicted American identity. We see ourselves as anti-colonial. We fought Britain for independence. As the good guys, we defeated Nazis. As liberators, we spread democracy. A war where we were the colonial power, where we committed atrocities, where we crushed democracy, that doesn't fit the story. So we forgot it. But that makes us vulnerable to repeating the same mistakes. When we forget that we used waterboarding in 1902 and it failed, we're more likely to use it again in 2002 and act shocked when it fails again. When we forget that concentration camps and civilian destruction in the Philippines turned the population against us, we're more likely to try the same tactics in Vietnam and wonder why we lost. Lesson 5. The victims remember what the perpetrators forget. Americans forgot the Philippine War. Filipinos didn't. Just like Americans have largely forgotten our interventions in Guatemala, Iran, Chile, Nicaragua, and dozens of other countries. But the people in those countries remember. Their histories are shaped by American actions that we don't even learn about in school. This creates a disconnect. Americans wonder, why do they hate us? We genuinely don't understand. But they remember. They remember what we did, even when we've forgotten. 200,000 to 1 million dead. Most of them civilians. Most of them from disease and starvation caused by U.S. military strategy. 126,000 U.S. troops deployed. 4,200 killed. Thousands more wounded or traumatized. 3 years of official war. Years more of sporadic fighting. Systematic use of torture. The water cure. The rope cure. Beating prisoners for hours. Concentration camps. Forced relocation. Destruction of food supplies. Kill everyone over 10. Orders to turn entire islands into howling wildernesses. And for over a century, Americans mostly didn't know this happened. We learned about Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. About remember the